And so we're going to talk a bit about user testing. So I actually have some notes on this. So we're going to look at those first, and then we'll go over the technical component of things. So this is in the Open Lab. Go to the lectures and go to user testing. So we're just going to talk about user testing a little bit before we create a little survey. User testing. So throughout the semester, we've discussed things like positive and negative feedback, progression and emergence, goals, rewards, and obstacles, and other aspects of designing game mechanics. So now it's time to put those principles in action and collect information based on a user's experience of our games. So we can kind of design games with certain things in mind, but until we get feedback from users, either confirming or not confirming our goals for the game, we won't know if those ideas really worked or not. So user testing is an essential aspect of game design. As I mentioned earlier, unlike other artistic disciplines, interaction is an essential component of game design. So we can't call our games finished until we test how people interact with them. Games are meant to be played, so we need to understand what works and what doesn't to make sure our work is playable. So just a few guidelines of what to test for. So we need to get good feedback, and so we need to ask good questions to get good feedback from our users. So there's a little bit of a difference between bugs and playability. Sometimes games just don't work. Like there's aspects of the code that are broken, or they don't load correctly, or they crash. Those are just bugs, and that's something that you probably have people testing for, like quality assurance testers. But that's not really the kind of feedback you want to get. Our games should ideally be, not buggy before we get people to play them. So people can focus on the playability rather than things that might just be broken with our game. So bugs versus playability. So the first thing to look for is onboarding or guidance. And you'll probably remember that from our game design lecture. This is just whether or not the player actually understood how to play the game. Did they understand the basic controls for movement, how to achieve the basic goals of the game, how to play the game in general? So we should have some type of onboarding to help the player understand how the game works, whether it's literal instructions or game design that brings the player through different game mechanics gradually. And so that's one thing that we want to test for and ask about in our survey. Playtime is another good thing to talk about. So how long did the player play the game? Did they make it to the end? If not, did they give up? Why did they give up? This is an important thing to get a sense of, does the goal of the game, does our imagined playtime match the actual playtime? So if you made a game that you think is supposed to last for 10 hours and people can play it in 5 minutes, that probably means that there's something missing there. On the other hand, if you made a game that's supposed to last for 5 minutes and it takes people an hour to play, maybe the difficulty is higher than you thought, or it's confusing or something like that. So the playtime can tell us a lot about the experience of the game versus our expectations. So we can have a little question about how long did you play for? It's good to have a goal in terms of the gameplay length. A casual game might have a short playtime, while a complex RPG could be played for dozens of hours. Does the player's playtime match the expectation? Why or why not? Some principles of testing. So we want to expect that our users have little or no familiarity with gaming. Users have different levels of familiarity with gaming. Don't assume a user is bad at gaming or doesn't understand something. It's a game designer's job. It's our job to make things clear. So if you get feedback that says this is too hard, our initial reaction might be to say, well, you suck at playing games. But if somebody says it's too hard, that means that we haven't given them enough onboarding or made things clear enough on how to play the game. And we want to seek both qualitative and quantitative types of feedback. Quantitative feedback is things that can be measured. So the gameplay time is a good example of that. And this is also a good way to get general trends. So if you ask, rate the game difficulty 1 to 5, and everybody says 5, then you can know that it's pretty difficult. Whereas if everybody says 1 or 2, you might think it's not that hard. So quantitative feedback is good for getting trends that are similar among different users. So we might have rate the difficulty, and we can see how many users chose the different difficulties. Qualitative feedback is written feedback, where the user gives specific feedback that we have to read and interpret. There's no way to kind of aggregate that data. So this is useful for players to kind of give more kind of phenomenological or qualitative or experiential feedback about the game, like what it actually feels like to play the game, what they think could be better or worse, what their reactions, what things they liked or disliked. All these different things are specifics that we can get from different users. So they may vary between different users, but we might also see, repetition in terms of the things that they're talking about. So to start, we want to, kind of hone in on what about the game we want to test. So choosing specific elements of the game that are important to the success. So we don't want to just ask a bunch of generic questions. We want to think about what makes our game unique, and then ask things that kind of lead the user to comment on those aspects, so we know if we're succeeding in those regards. So for example, if you have a game that is heavily narrative, we want to ask users about the narrative experience. Frame the questions so that we get honest answers. So instead of saying what was your favorite level, we can ask which level did you like the most. So we're implying that the user liked the game. If we say they had a favorite level, we can use more neutral language by saying which level did you like the most, and we'll get more honest feedback. So it's a subtle difference, but that language can change the way that people are thinking about the game. We want to include both specific and ambiguous questions to get a range of feedback. But avoid asking the user to invent a new game. You don't want to ask what they would change or add to the game. You want feedback on the game that you created. So that's something I notice a lot in doing user feedback sessions, is that people will say like, it was cool, but I wish that my player was blue instead of red or something like that. Or I wish there was dragons instead of snakes or something. And it's sort of like, okay, that's fine. That's what you like. But what do you think about this game? Is there a reason why dragons would be better than snakes? Or is there a reason why blue would be better than red? So that you get more than just personal preference and get reactions to the game that people are actually playing. Okay, so we are going to make a little survey. It's going to be very, very simple. We're going to use Google Forms, and then we're going to add it back to our itch page, a link to it. So if you have a Google account, I assume that most people have a Google account. If you don't, it's pretty easy to create one. But you can just go to forms.google.com. I would guess that a lot of you guys have done this before. I'm going to switch over to my BMCC Gmail account. And so you can see versions of this that I've done in past classes. And so let's start with just a blank form, and we'll just give the form a name, my game feedback. I'll call this Spring 2022. And so then it's pretty easy to just add different types of questions here. And so you might want to have a link that goes back to the game itself. So I'm going to grab a link to this itch page in case people miss it. And so I'll say, please give feedback on my game, and have a little link here. And then I'll start adding some questions. So the user testing, you can have between 5 and 10 questions. You want to have a mix of qualitative and quantitative questions. So we'll just get started. I'm going to go edit this question. So let's just get started with the playtime. So we'll use multiple choice for this and say, how long did you play the game for? And then we'll give them a few answers. So we can have option 1 be less than 5 minutes. Option 2 is 5 to 10 minutes. Option 3 is 10 to 20 minutes. And then option 4 is more than 20 minutes. So we want to set these ranges based on what we would kind of expect. I would be really surprised if anybody played my game that has 2 levels for more than 20 minutes, but that's probably the outside edge of what might happen. And then less than 5 minutes, if you played the game really quickly, you could certainly beat it in less than 5 minutes. So I think that's a pretty good range. You might want to adjust for what you expect your gameplay to be. So this is for this multiple choice question, when we get some responses to this, it'll turn into like a little pie chart. So that'll be a good way to kind of evaluate how that looks. So let's add a different type of question. So we'll say rate the difficulty of the game. And so for this one, you can see Google form has already guessed that I want to use a linear scale. And so we can use 1 to 5, that's fine. And so for the label for 1, we'll just say very easy. And for the label for 5, we'll say very difficult. So people can rate on that scale, and then we'll see the responses, and we can make some determinations based on that. And so then we might want to add a chance for people to give some qualitative feedback. So I'm just going to give a couple examples. You guys should obviously, add as many different survey questions as you want. So let's add in a qualitative example. So let's say let me go back to my notes because I'm blanking. Okay, yeah, describe your experience of the game. Okay. Describe your experience of the game. So this is going to give people a chance to kind of say whatever, they feel like. It's very open-ended. They can talk about things they like. They could talk about things they don't like. They could comment on all sorts of different things. And then we could also ask questions to focus on certain parts. So for example, if I really wanted to make sure my sound effects were good, I could add a question that says something like, did the sound effects match the gameplay? And so this can be another open-ended question for people to kind of comment on. Or we could just do like yes, no, I don't know. There's some different options there. So those are a few example questions. You guys can modify those or add to them. Let's take a look at what this form looks like. So if I click on this little eyeball, it gives me a little preview. And so it looks pretty good. And we can also test this. So if I click send, you can send via email, but we can also send a link. I'm going to go to the link, and I can shorten the URL if I want and copy. And I'm going to go to an incognito window and just fill it out so we can see what the results will look like. So I'm just going to make up some fake data. So I'll say less than 5 minutes, very difficult, blah, 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 and blah, blah. And let's do one more so we can see how it looks. So I'll do this one and okay. So now when we go back, we can see we have some responses, and Google is going to kind of change the way that this data looks for us. So for our multiple choice, we have like a little pie chart. For our linear, we have this little bar graph. And then for the qualitative or written responses, we see the text here. And so we can also look just at specific questions, or we can look at individual survey responses. And so when you're done with the user testing, you can write a Open Lab post to just summarize. And you don't have to actually implement this, but you should come up with some things that you want to do to fix the game based on the feedback. So if I was going to submit this, I would go over to the Open Lab and create a new post. And this is for user testing. And I'll say my user feedback. And so we want to include the images in here because those are pretty cool. So we can snip those or capture those however you want. I'll use the little snip tool. So I'll use, let me get that close. Do that for one. And let's save this. I'm going to save it, put it in my project folder, my game. I guess I'll make a new folder. I'll just call this user testing and save that in there. And then I'll snip the next one. And then for the qualitative ones, we can just summarize it. So I'm going to save this here. And now I can put these in my post. So I'll go back to my MMP 270 folder, go to user testing, and just throw these on here. Oh, whoops. I need to make sure to get the little blue guy. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay, there we go. And then just a summary of the qualitative feedback. And so after we do a summary, so I'll say summarize qualitative feedback, spelled qualitative. Then we can choose things to work on. So you could just list them. So I'll say like one, I want to improve the sound effects. I want to make gameplay longer and make the game less difficult. So just based on the feedback that you get, just come up with a few things that you want to change about the game. Again, you don't actually have to do this. Obviously you can, and I encourage you to do it if you want to make your game better. But I just want to see that analysis that you got the feedback and you can come up with ideas for how to make the game better based on that feedback. The gallery's view is like a little too small. How do I just do, there we go, that's better. Okay, so now we can actually see that stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much it, just using Google Forms. So you can ask people in the game, in the class, to review your game. You can send it to your friends. You can make your parents do it, whatever you need to do to get feedback on the game, and then just publish that. So that's it for user testing. And so for all of those publishing labs, they're all worth 5 points. So they're worth a lot of points because I want to encourage you guys to actually publish and distribute your games and get feedback on them. And so if you're close to having a game finished, or even if you're just like halfway done, you can still publish the game and get feedback, because then you can improve the game and add to it. So the last thing I want to do is just put a link to this form. So I would go to send and get this URL and copy, and let's just edit our itch page. So in the description down here, I'll say, please you give feedback on my game here, and just paste a little link there and save and click here. So now you can just send the game page, and people can download the game here or play it in the browser up here, and then they can go to the form and give feedback there. Okay, so that is the user testing lab.